Ladies and gentlemen, the greatest sporting spectacle that we have ever seen is officially coming to Paris, France. And I'm not talking about the Olympics. I'm talking about Magnus Carlsen versus Hans Niemann, a rematch of epic proportions and at the highest stakes. It's currently August of 2024, and the Speed Chess Championship, for the first time ever hosted by Chess.com, is going to be hosted live in Paris, France for the semifinals and the finals. And if you've been following the chess world at all since September of 2022, you know Magnus Carlsen and you know Hans Niemann, and they have both qualified and they will be playing against each other. In this video, I'm going to take you through how we got here, how Hans made it into the semis, how Magnus made it into the semis, and also I will talk about the absurdly incredible Hans Niemann interview that he gave to Chess.com, and specifically Daniel Naroditsky after. And if you haven't watched that full interview, watch it afterwards. There are tickets available for Paris, France. Link will be in the description to that. If you do want to be there in person, I will be there in person, and so will Ali Reza Firouzja, Magnus Carlsen, Hans Niemann, and the winner of the matchup between Hikaru Nakamura and Jan Nepomniachtchi. Also, longtime viewers of the channel, welcome to Italy. My camera is standing on a ledge on top of a tiny garbage can that I have turned upside down to be a tripod. I'll take a picture of it for the Patreon folks. Yeah, folks, here we go. This is really just unbelievable and spectacular stuff. I'm gonna take you through how we made it here, and then I'm going to take you through the Crazy Hans interview, and then I'm gonna take you through Magnus Carlsen's games and Magnus's interview, which wasn't really an interview, you know what I mean? Here we go. So Hans's opponent in the quarterfinals was Wesley So. Wesley So has never lost to somebody except for Hikaru Nakamura and Magnus Carlsen in this format. In Rapid especially, Wesley is one of the best players in the world. And Hans never was in danger in this match, ever. And as we see, we have the we have the accuracy score there. I'm gonna go through it, obviously. So if there are any technical difficulties, please keep in mind I'm on a travel setup, so we will be a little bit bumpy today, but afterward we will stabilize. E4, E5. Hans played the Italian exclusively against Wesley. Wesley is an E4, E5 savant. I mean, he plays this system all the time. He knows it with both colors. And really the difference in this match was this segment of 5+1. You should see the time control there on your left-hand side, 453 and 453 for both players. They played this line of the Italian exclusively, and it was Hans Niemann who basically from every sort of boring, innocuous position, like relatively equal position, you see the evaluation up there, about 0.2, 0.3, like, he was just starting these fights with Wesley. He was finding a way to just put nagging pressure on Wesley from all different angles. And you'll look at the time. Look at the time, right? He would get a 1 to 2 minute advantage pretty consistently against Wesley So, and he would pressure him. Yes, I understand, like, not every move is perfect. Here, Hans had to play Queen E5 or first play CB6. This move looks like it blunders a fork, but there is Queen D3 pinning the knight to the rook, so you can't just take the rook. And, what ended up happening was they would get into these scrambles, right? They both have less than a minute. They've got 50 seconds versus 25 seconds. And Hans would just win. I mean, Hans would basically just outplay Wesley. Here he's just up a piece. And of course, they're in a scramble, so the engine, is complaining about some of their moves. But Wesley just trades down into a losing endgame. And he made rush decisions like this many times in this match. Almost like he was a bit psychologically rattled and defeated. And we see here, Hans pulled off this win. Perhaps the most impressive win of the entire match for Hans Niemann was this one. This is one of the most absurd games I've ever seen two Super GMs play. Please pay attention. So Wesley, I love saying So Wesley because that's literally his name. This one was a Spanish. It was a Berlin. It was an anti-Berlin. That just means that white does not allow black to capture this pawn on E4. And it was a relatively, straightforward and harmless game, but Wesley built up a beautiful attack. He put his bishop, rook, and knight front and center. He tucked his king. He went here, and now we see the makings of devastation, right? Hans fired back with f5. Notice Hans is up a minute again, just like the last game. His time management was really good. But look at this. I mean, Wesley just played an absolutely gorgeous, kind of powerful game, and c5 was an amazing move by Hans. The point is the bishop is hanging, but then I would take, and then my queen would attack your knight. And it was Hans who was finding a lot of really nice defensive resources in this game, but very quickly he found himself in a totally lost position. And here, the way Wesley should advance forward is to push his e-pawn. He is winning if he pushes his e-pawn up the board, right? So if he plays e5, e6, f6, f7. Instead, he ventures over here, which is still okay, and he is able to get a winning position again. And he plays f6 and rook e6 and rook d1. Rook d3 was actually better. Wesley blunders this pawn because of the pin. Neither player sees it, by the way. And now Wesley is completely winning. It is +6. He is winning this position if he plays rook f7, h7, and then he can give a check and push through with the f-pawn. He also doesn't have to sacrifice. He can play rook e7. He has pawns that are all about to queen. Rook d8, b5, rook f8. He is completely winning. And now walking the king over just patiently wins him the game. He goes here, though, and suddenly it's probably a draw. So Hans saves the day. Then not only does Hans save the day, Hans gets some winning chances because he's almost going to win the pawn on b2, which is kind of insane. Now, you know, the way this is going to end is black is going to play c3, and then you're just going to trade the bishop off, right? So c3, you know, if white just wants to make a draw, he does this. If you don't want to make the draw, then you try to win the pawn, and then rook and bishop versus rook is probably a draw. And folks, I am not joking. In this position, Wesley So allows c2, and then he allows rook d1. And now Wesley is in... What was that? Oh, that was the brilliant move. Okay. Shut up. Wesley is in an endgame, which is a draw. Rook versus bishop. You have to draw this by running your king here, but of course, like, this is completely unnecessary. And, you know, he runs his king to the corner, and he loses the game. You know, he had to wait. He had to just, like, move the bishop somewhere. Bishop g3, bishop here. Like, these are the two moves. What you can't do is you can't go there. And Wesley loses this game. And this really was the difference. The 5+1 segment of this match ended 5-2 to Hans. 3+1 and 1+1 were 4-4. So it was a very close match. But Wesley dug himself a hole early he could not get out of. And he didn't play his best. He really didn't. And I think a part of it has to be the psychological stress of playing Hans. And just because you know there's all the potential trash talk coming, right? You know there's all of the, you know, like losing to Hans is a tough thing because he's going to go online and he's going to say he's the best player in the world and all this stuff. And I think these guys do feel a bit of pressure playing against him. Now, Hans wins. And he goes on an interview, and this is a chess.com article. I'll put this in the description. And I'm just going to quickly summarize this because obviously you can watch the whole thing. He talked about the chess establishment's collusion against him, the vengeance. He talked about the chess.com report that was published about him where, you know, they said, here's where we believe that Hans has cheated online. He also defended his friend Brandon Jacobson, aka Vso, the grandmaster that played against Naroditsky. If you don't know what I'm talking about, there's a video on the channel. Guy who played like a silly opening about 200 times and had a really good score against Naroditsky in a blitz match. And, you know, he said things like, the chess comp monopoly and mafia defame my reputation. I'm letting the chess speak for itself. You got to watch the interview because he went at Magnus. He went at chess.com. He defended himself and once again reiterated the fact that, yes, he admits to having cheated online many, many years ago. He would absolutely never do it now. He wants to move on, and he feels as though people don't understand the burden and the pressure on the shoulders of him as a aspiring and growing chess player. You know, when he just became like the poster child of like of this cheating scandal that happened, and completely unfairly, he talked about getting. I think there's a mosquito in the room. Uh-oh, that's bad. He talked about getting blacklisted. He talked about a lot of things. Now, overall, it was here are my thoughts on the interview, which you can then watch, and then you can compare them to my thoughts. I thought it was a good interview for content, obviously. I think, there are some things in there that I have even mentioned on this channel agreeing with, like the fact that it's a shame that some of these things that Hans has done in the past will potentially follow him along for the rest of his career, just like people just, never believing in him or in his legitimacy, not believing in his games and so on, as well as getting, blacklisted from tournaments and et cetera, et cetera. But I have also very openly stated on this channel, like, yeah, I mean, that's just sort of the reality. At the same time, like, Hans is a really brash guy. There's no shying away from that. Scandal aside, I don't know if he would behave the same way ever since he kind of became like the bad boy of chess, if you will. He goes at me, he goes at, Magnus, he goes at Hikaru, he goes at, chess.com, other folks. That's kind of like, it's not really a win necessarily. Chess has historically not really been an activity that rewards that. We're not the UFC, as much as that would be kind of an interesting thing. But it was a really it was an interview for the ages, and you should definitely watch it. And but I will say I agree with some things in the interview, and other things not so much. I think just like anything in life, there are nuances. There are things said very confidently, but that might not necessarily be 100% reality, right? Danny Wrench responded to Hans Niemann. He made a whole Twitter thread responding, and then today Magnus played, right? So today Magnus played. And, the extent of Danny's posts on Twitter were like, there is no collusion against you. It might just be the consequences of your own actions and your behavior that people don't want to invite you to tournaments. Chess.com believes you have cheated more than you admit, which is a problem. And again, it sort of goes back to what I said previously. A lot of these top players might feel weird playing against Hans, knowing he's cheated online in the past. Now, having said that, Hans himself in the interview said there are people who have been banned online who are playing against Magnus, who are playing against Hikaru, and they are playing them. They are happily playing those guys. Maybe not happily, but they're playing those individuals, but they don't want to play me. I was like, you know that meme? Like, I was like, you know what? He's spitting. Not like out of his mouth, but that is slang for the adults watching. So it was it's a fascinating time, and we're not even done because I just realized it says Madrid full recap. Oh, that's because I'm on the wrong overlay. Oh, I'm so dumb. I'm sleep deprived. Today, Magnus played against Arjun Erigaisi, and the winner of this match qualifies to play Hans Niemann. Now I'm going to take you through the Magnus match, and then I'm going to take you through what to expect in Paris, because this is some crazy stuff, y'all. So Magnus versus Erigaisi. I think this was game number 1. It was a Petrov defense chosen by Erigaisi, queen e2 from Magnus, and a move I've never seen in my life, pawn to g3. I've never seen this. I mean, generally, white is like trying to play for the center. Instead, we have bishop g2, bishop g4. Black takes a very aggressive approach. I think the mosquito might have bitten me, by the way. I'm going to get revenge on it, though. Knight to d4. Look at this. This is the game got really crazy really early on. If you take, there is knight c2, which actually Magnus welcomes, and instead of knight c2, he goes knight takes f3 check. Bishop bishop f3 would lose a piece to bishop f3, or not lose a piece, but it would allow the light squared bishop to dominate the position. So instead, we have this position from the opening. And, bishop e3, c3, h3, f4, this is what white wants. Arjun playing very, very well, very accurately. The knight is being booted, and Magnus kind of makes this structure. And it is a very interesting position. I've never seen anybody play like this before, which is why I really like to watch Magnus play blitz games, because sometimes he throws out like super random ideas that aren't particularly fascinating, but he gets positions that are that have play in them, right? And so now he's going to try to expand this pawn majority. King f3, his king is doing the dirty work. Now we're going to an endgame with, rooks and bishops. And we're just going to, here we're going to just see a maestro go to work. First, he plays king f3, so he disallows the rook to enter. Arjun takes, and he wants to take over the h-file to get some activity for his rook. King g3. Now, you would think here the best move is rook e8. Maybe he was a little bit concerned about, another rook infiltration. I'm really not sure why he didn't go rook e8. He just brings his king. And now, like I said, we're going to watch him maestro go to work. So first, he's blocking Arjun's light square play. He's taking over the e-file. And now he plays a5. So that pawn now controls 2 pawns. So Magnus is sort of winning the mini battle of pawns. Another thing he's going to consider is this move b4. And he's literally going to consider it on the next move. Now, Arjun here getting a little bit desperate, right? 17 seconds on the clock. He's looking to kind of fight back. Rook c8. And here the move f5 is winning, which is a really difficult move to play. But basically, you give up b4. And it's not about bishop g5, it's about bishop b4 check, followed by rook e7, rook e6, this kind of stuff. In the game, we have this, fg5, and the game gets sharp, obviously. They don't have a particularly high amount of time, but it is Magnus who emerges with the dominant g-pawn, and rook c7 is a very nice move. It's a fork, if you will. It is a fork, because you cannot take because of the queen. If you play rook e8, that's actually the best move. It stops bishop e3, and then the game would go on. But yeah, Arjun, I think, lost on time after rook c7. And, there were some games like this, some big battles. And but Arjun was fair game. I mean, Magnus was winning, but it was Arjun also fighting back. I mean, Arjun was beating Magnus several times. Here, Magnus plays this Janowski, a6, Queen's Gambit declined, knight f3, bishop f4. Magnus plays a6, h6, which is some seriously edgy business. Kind of 2 waiting moves. Clearly nothing special about this line. I mean, if this was some great way to play, then Black would be doing it all the time. But Magnus is very experienced in these positions, and the problem is that White is always and forever slightly better. And you see here, we see Arigaisi kind of putting some pressure on that queen side. He missed the chance to be a good amount better, but he still gets the vintage queenside minority attack with ABD versus ABCD, right? White is missing a c pawn, so this is minority attack because you have 3 versus 4. And b5. And I mean, this is just kind of easy game for White. So Arjun implements the exact game plan of the Queen's Gambit declined, rook c8, rook d1, and very slowly just improves his position. And I mean, he's almost playing Magnus the way Magnus would be playing him if the colors were reversed, which I found very interesting. So rook a4, queen d2, rook d1. Now Magnus, of course, going to get counterplay. He's not going to go down without a fight. And the position is back to equal. Magnus has sort of stabilized the position. Now he's the one putting a little bit of pressure. Arjun down to 26 seconds, may I say? Knight e5, knight d7, and here Magnus, in an uncharacteristic fashion, he can play queen f5. What I think he didn't like is that knight b6, right? He's just losing a pawn. But here he plays knight takes f4, going for a knockout. He calculates that, both queens hang. He calculates that after pawn takes, there's queen f4 as rook c1 ideas. But he completely forgets the queen can move. And the knight is hanging, this is hanging, and Arjun plays queen f4, and after queen d7, there was just a fork. There was a fork. Oh my god. There's a bug. There's a little bug on my... I just wanted to make sure it wasn't a tick. I'm like surrounded by the wilderness here in Italy. Kind of nice. Didn't know Italy was basically like a little, trip to the zoo. Rook d5, queen d8, and yeah, Arjun's going to win. I mean, Magnus is almost going to checkmate him. Almost made a draw like 40 times by repeating the moves. I mean, this is very, very scary business. But this is simply checkmate. And Arjun did not go down. I mean, he did not go down without a fight. He really wanted to go to Paris. He really wanted to play Hans Niemann. But he was winning some amazing games. There was this game in particular, which he won against Magnus in a fashion that was so shocking. It was a really boring game, and it was, Magnus basically about to beat a guy the way he always does, right? Magnus has bishop versus knight, which is considered better in the endgame. White has split pawns, which is just bad. Rook d3, rook e1, f6, rook e2, and king f7. And I mean, he has a minus 0.3 position, and one guy has 9 seconds on the clock. I mean, this is literally like exactly like if somebody could make a roadmap of how to lose to Magnus Carlsen as a top grandmaster, it would be like this. So, you know, he slowly is making the improvements. He's gonna break through. He's gonna win the game. He's doing the same thing. You see how he likes to have one pawn controlling 2 pawns, right? Bishop d6, king d7. Okay, he's just waiting. He's just waiting. He's looking for the moment. He's looking for the right moment. It's typical man. He hangs his rook. He hangs his rook. Knight b3, knight c2. He straight up just forgot that the rook. Now both guys miss it because they have 2 and 5 seconds on the clock. And now we go to a rook endgame. And either Magnus realized he blundered and just couldn't recover, like he was rattled, but he starts giving up pawns and playing for aggression and playing for a win. He's able to barely hold it together here. It's 2-on-2. And then in the scramble, rook in 1 versus rook in 1. I mean, the amount of times Magnus has won games like this. And here, he goes king g5. And for no reason at all, he moves his king. And I mean, yeah, I get it. Like, he wanted to go here. But he just straight up loses the game. Because after rook g8, he cannot march forward. Because there is king f5. That's the key move. g3, rook h8 is mate. Rook a5, e5, and the pawn is going to... That's not even correct, apparently. King f4. What? Why is it not e5? Because then the king runs. And king f4, the king can't run because rook g4 in this... Oh... Yeah, and that's what happened. That's why I'm here and they're there, you know. And this is just losing for black. It's losing because your king is complete. You can't be cut off on the last rank of the board if you're trying to defend a king and rook endgame. Yeah, now the king walks all the way, and Magnus just resigns here because he can continue to give checks, but basically what's going to happen is like here the pawn is going to be a shield, and even let's say this position is a complete win because you will ultimately shield your king and then bring the king out. So he was not going down without a fight, but then Magnus decided to show up and tell everybody he's Magnus. And then after this game, I'll tell you about the interview and I will preview the semifinal matchup between these two guys. This was Magnesian. I mean, bishop d3, by the way, is a move I have never, ever seen, ever. I'm not even joking. I have never seen that move. Basically, the point of this move is that if you take on e4 and knight takes, there is no queen d4. There's a very famous trap, bishop b5 check, and this discovered attack on the queen. So you can't do that, but c5 is just considered very good for black. Magnus goes knight f3, cd4, knight d4, and just goes for this position. Just says, okay, we're going to play this, and then b3, bishop b2, and we're going to chill. Arjun plays a5. And now watch as Magnus puts on a clinic. Knight goes out to a4, controlling the squares and opening the dark squared bishop. The rook comes to the middle, self-explanatory. c4. The point of c4 is to put more pressure on this pawn, and if it takes, it leaves behind 2 very passive pawns. Those pawns are propping up the pawn on d5, but without the pawn on d5, those pawns are just kind of bad, which is why he goes here. Magnus brings another pawn. He's either going to create a kingside attack, or he's just going to play king h1, or maybe even e5 to create a wedge. Now Arjun takes. So now Arjun has left a weak pawn on c6 and has completely left Magnus's entire trio of queenside pawns intact. Rook d8, rook d3, threatening a kingside attack, making Arjun expand another pawn. Every pawn he pushes, his position gets weaker. The bishop goes back. Now Magnus's queen is attacking the pawn on e6. He trades again. And now simply rook d1 and queen e5. And it's absolute domination. It's domination on the dark squares. It's domination of the d file. a5 is a huge weakness. The knight is coming in on the dark squares. And probably here my favorite move of the entire game. And it's the top engine move. How is white going to make a breakthrough in this position, capitalizing on all of his advantages? He's not. He's going to play h3. Because black can't make a move. And the king is going to be safe here forever, which allows your rook to then leave and go to battle. I mean, h3 is just wicked. Rook d6, Arjun going for some counterplay. Rook e6, just an absolute buzzsaw. Rook e7. King h2 just hiding away from any checks. He could have moved his knight, but, he does this, and that's a wrap. Queen f6, just an absolute buzzsaw. This was vintage Magnesian chess, like hydraulic press, and He wins the match ultimately. He won it, I think, by either 3 or 4 games. His biggest lead was 5, but then in the bullet, he lost 1 or 2 games by the margin, and but ultimately he does win. Now, that means that it's Magnus versus Hans. Now, let's keep in mind the games that Magnus and Hans have played against each other since the scandal broke out. Magnus resigned against him in 1 move. That was like a couple weeks after that game in St. Louis. Then there was the lawsuit. And then when the lawsuit was settled, Magnus basically put out a statement that said, I'd be willing to play him in a tournament if we got paired against each other. When they play Entitled Tuesday, they have played Entitled Tuesday on chess.com a handful of times. They have played. I think they've played 3 times, and the score is 2.5 to half for Magnus, but the games have been close. Recently, they have been at tournaments together in the same room, but they haven't been paired against each other. World Rapid and Blitz Championships. Hans has not done that great in those, so he doesn't get high enough to play Magnus. But they're in the same room. And now, most recently, they were supposed to play in a tournament in Kazakhstan. And Magnus sat out the games that he was supposed to play against Hans. And that was kind of wild. And it seems like Magnus's philosophy is, if I don't have to play him, I won't. That's sort of it. Today, Magnus gave an interview, and, the UFC fan in me, right? Like, the fan in me of brash, like, I find, interviews by, like, tennis players who have some, fiery attitude, like Medvedev or Kyrgios in some interviews or whatever. Even Djokovic, when he, gives it back to people. I really like stuff like that because I don't like all this high-class sports stuff. I was really hoping Magnus would sit down and be like, I don't like the guy. It's no secret I don't like the guy, but we're going to play against each other and so on. And yeah, Magnus's interview was essentially, it is what it is. Obviously, I would prefer to have a different opponent. If I play my best, I think I'll win, and I don't think it will be particularly close, and this mosquito is trying to eat my leg. And Magnus basically said, I have said what I said. What Hans said about me is not surprising to me. I have said my piece. He also said something about a documentary, so I guess he has been interviewed for some documentary. And that was it. That was all the comments that we got from Magnus. And, but Magnus Hans is a crazy matchup, and you can see it live in person in Paris. I can't believe it's actually going to happen. I can't wait to watch and commentate it. Stay tuned. For those of you that follow my channel every day, I'm playing in a chess tournament in Italy. It begins tomorrow, August 9th. So thank you for your continued support. Road to GM will return. And Magnus Hans, Paris, France, September. Good night from Italy. Get out of here.